In Lebanon, Lebanon has been going through a horrible, horrible economic crisis for quite some time. So you remember towards the end of 2019, we covered it on this channel, these protests that started in Lebanon, in the capital Beirut, in Martyr Square, Saht al-Shuhada. So, basically, people are sick of the corruption. You have to understand the situation in Lebanon. It's a beautiful country, but politically, it is a mess. They had a horrible, long 30-year civil war. After that, in the last decades, you've had... I can't encapsulate it. I mean, we've covered this so much, but the corruption is unbelievable, right? So don't get it. Don't be mistaken. Those protests are legitimate. There is real corruption. And then, of course, you had the Beirut blast. I mean, by the way, just 1 second. I just want to show you some images of the protests, right, from back then. Because I want to give you some history, some recent history before I get into the news that just took place, right? So you remember in Saht al-Shuhada, we had these protests going on, right? There we go. So this is back from October 2019. And, people were protesting against a bunch of stuff. The corruption in the government. They tried to do some WhatsApp tax. It was ridiculous. It was ridiculous. And then you had the Beirut blast, which, happened last year in summer 2020. And that was absolutely tragic. And then, the government fell apart. You had people resigning. They promised to form a new government. You had Macron visiting, and there's still nothing. There's still nothing. And ever since, the economic crisis has been getting worse and worse and worse and worse. And just to give you an idea, I think this is very, very eloquently put together. It's from Al Jazeera, surprisingly, right? So let me just show you here. They've done a comparison between the cost of basic items and common goods going from 2019 to 2021, right? So this is by Mohammed Hussein for Al Jazeera. You can see it just by this picture alone, how dire the situation is. So in 2019, you could buy a couple of groceries. With the same money in 2021, you can barely afford, a carton of milk or a bottle of milk. So Lebanon is suffering from its worst economic crisis in 30 years. Across the country, tens of thousands of people have lost their jobs. A million more struggle to buy basic necessities, right? All amid the continuing coronavirus pandemic. The crisis has caused the value of the Lebanese pound, or lira, to plummet to record lows. Okay, so Lebanon imports about 80% of the goods it consumes. So a weak lira, by the way, in Syria we also call the Syrian pound lira, but we're talking about Lebanon. So a weak Lebanese lira has had a serious effect on people's purchasing power. Food items today cost about 5 times more than they did in 2019. Now I want you to keep something in mind. This article is from just a month and a half ago, right? So just from 12th of April. And now, just more recently, okay, this article, you can see the headline. This is from 3 days ago in Arab News. Look at the headline. Dollar exchange rate reaches 14,000 Lebanese pounds on the black market. So this is a record low. The more, as time goes by, it just gets worse and worse. That's my point, right? But everything is still valid in the points being made here, nonetheless. So just going back to our article over here. Again, we're talking about the protests, right? And in October 2019, at the time, 10,000 lira were officially worth $6.63, and you could buy you basic necessities such as milk, rice, and vegetables. Today, you would be lucky to buy a liter, 1 quart of milk for 10,000 lira, which is worth less than $1 on the black market. That's catastrophic, honestly. Right? I mean, even back then, it's so bad, and look what it's gotten to. So you can see here in 2019, with 10,000 Lebanese pounds or 10,000 lira, you can buy milk, you can buy some vegetables, right? Chicken. 2020, a year later, with the same amount of money, no more chicken. You just got milk, some oranges, and tomatoes. And then 2021, no more tomatoes or tomatoes. Nothing, just milk. Right? It's getting worse and worse and worse. And it's not just food, of course. It's clothing and medicines, right? So everything has gone up as well. On average, food items today cost about 5 times as much compared to 2019, right? The price of a liter of milk has increased 3 times, from 3,000 lira in March 2019 to 10,000 lira. Okay, cooking oil has risen The price has risen by 16 times. Basic clothing, such as a basic no-name t-shirt, increased ninefold, right? Other basics, such as bread, increased for the first time in 10 years, despite flour being subsidized by the government. So you can see, I just want to put into context, I just want to explain to you how dire the situation is. And just as a side note, well, it's not really a side note, it's quite important, but I haven't seen it mentioned in any of these articles. The Syrian economy and Lebanese economy are very, very, very interlinked, right? So Syria itself is under sanctions, right? And even before the sanctions, the Caesar Act that came into effect a year ago, right, in June, under the Trump administration, June 2020. Even before that, always, a lot of Syrian goods, product, services, you know, they flowed through Beirut. The economies, the countries are you know, they're completely interlinked, geographically, economically, culturally, right? Lebanese have the closest dialect to us. So it's almost identical. So because of sanctions, because of the war, a lot of Syrian businesses, they would do their business through Beirut. And then you had the crisis itself in Lebanon happening. You had the blast at the port. There's a shortage of foreign currencies, right? There are no dollars. You know, people can't even access their money. It's the inflation. It's terrible. So the bad situation in Syria increased the bad situation in Lebanon and vice versa. That's my point, right? So it's important to understand that. Now, just going back, okay? Just going back to what's happening now. Here's an article, okay? This is from, it's about a speech that Nasrallah gave on, just last week, right? So here's also from Arab News. Nasrallah defies Lebanese state, says he will import Iranian oil. So I'm going to play you the speech, the excerpt. It's just a minute. It's not even a minute, right? And I'll explain to you what he says, right? So this is Sayyid Nasrallah. He is the leader of Hezbollah, right? He's both a political party and also has a military wing in Lebanon, right? So let's just play the clip and I'll translate.
والمازوت
طبعا لازم تبقى الدولة بس ممكن يجي وقت خلص الدولة ايش تحمل مسؤولية.
Right? He says, of course, the state, meaning the government, must take care of it, but you know there might come a time where they can't handle it anymore.
بدنا نوصل على محل إنه ما في حل وهذا الذل بده يستمر. أنا من هلا بقول
We're going to get to a point, you know, where there's no solution and this suffering, well, you know, has to come to an end. So
نحن حزب الله حنروح على إيران.
We, Hezbollah, we will go to Iran.
نتفاوض مع الحكومة الإيرانية وهن قبلانين ونشتري بواخر نفط.
Right, and we'll negotiate with the Iranian government, and they're willing, and we will buy boats of fuel, right?
بواخر نفط بواخر بنزين لأنه نفط إذا جبنا ما في هون يبدلوه. بواخر بنزين وبواخر مازوت ونجيبها على مينا بيروت وخلي الدولة اللبنانية تمنع إدخال البنزين والمازوت إلى الشعب اللبناني.
Right? He said, we're going to go to Iran, we're going to negotiate, we're going to buy boatloads full of fuel, and we're going to bring that to the port in Beirut, right? We're going to bring that, we're going to bring it directly, and just dare the Lebanese government stop us. So he's challenging them because they haven't done anything. As you can see, it's of course, it's not just fuel shortages. As you can see in the video just before the images, right? I mean, it's not just the fuel shortages that are the problem. As we were just talking about, you have inflation. I mean, mass inflation, the price of basic necessities skyrocketing. And on top of that, the currency itself, the lira itself, has plummeted, right? It's at the highest it's ever been on the black market. I mean, it's terrible. It's absolutely terrible. Even though the Lebanese pound is pegged to the dollar, nonetheless. So it's not just that. You have a fuel crisis as well. And Nasrallah is basically, you know, he's challenging them. He's like, you better take care of it or we will. And, you know, you've had various responses to this. It's quite funny, actually. So I want to discuss the responses. You had some people in Lebanon, some politicians, who were saying, oh my God, look at what Hezbollah is doing, right? They're going to bring sanctions on us. Because what's the idea? Is that if Hezbollah starts bringing in oil from Iran, and the Lebanese government doesn't do anything, or the Lebanese authorities don't do anything, then the United States, right, will come with its big bad stick and will put sanctions on Lebanon, right? But the people who are saying this, they blame Hezbollah for everything. Okay? If tomorrow an asteroid hits the earth, they will say Hezbollah did it, okay? So these are people, you have a lot of them who are also fighting the civil war, but we're not going to get into all of Lebanese politics now. We've done that before on the channel. But anyway, you have people inside Lebanon, other politicians saying this. You have other people who are happy because, they would take things into their own hands. They would take charge of things. But that's not the main thing that I want to highlight here. Okay? That's not the main thing that I want to highlight. The funny thing here, and this is perfectly encapsulated, okay, from someone on Twitter, Sarah Haj. Take a look. Just a couple hours after Sayyid Nasrallah's speech, in which he said Hezbollah will import Iranian oil through Beirut airport and challenged Lebanese authorities to dare stop the ships, the American-backed Iraqi government decided to provide Lebanon with oil, increasing it by 1 million tons. Isn't that amazing, right? How quickly things happen. So this is from Middle East Monitor, right? Just a few hours ago. It says Lebanese President Michel Aoun thanked Iraq for doubling the amount of oil approved for Beirut from 500,000 tons to 1 million tons annually as the country suffers from a precarious economic. Okay, so it's quite funny, right? The Americans, and I can guarantee you the Israelis, must have been like, oh, Hezbollah is going to do what? No, quick, take the oil from Iraq. Just, don't make sure Hezbollah doesn't do that. That's funny. It's really funny, right? So all of a sudden now they've doubled, Iraq has doubled its supply of oil, 500,000 to 1 million tons a year annually to Lebanon. Now, of course, it doesn't fix the situation. I mean, neither of those things would. It's much bigger than that. There were promises that they were going to form a new government, right? But they're still busy. The last thing I read was that they're still having disagreements about choosing 2 Christian ministers because, the way the political system works in Lebanon, you have a quota, right? That was kind of that was a result of the civil war. It was a compromise in a way that, you would have a quota. You would have Shia, Sunni, Christian, etc., etc. You would have a quota of all the various, ethnic groups and religions in Lebanon in the government. So that was something. That's something that they're still working out. But I mean, it's not just that. It's not. You have to understand something. It's much bigger than just this. What they're talking about now. I mean, Hariri, who's the prime minister. Well, he. I don't know if he's running again or not, but he's been in politics quite some time. He's not the president. He's the prime minister, former prime minister. The president, Michel Aoun. All of these people, they've been in politics a long time, and Lebanese people in general are just sick of their government, right? They're sick of everyone. So it's a much bigger problem than just Iraq giving them a bit more oil. That's not going to solve it. And you have to consider that, Lebanon defaulted on its international debt for the first time in history. I think last year in 2020. So they have the IMF breathing down their neck, saying, "Look, if you don't do what is laid out, we're not going to give you another loan." And then you have Macron, who's coming in also like some colonizer. You remember he was saying like, "If I'm back in 2 months and you haven't found a government yet, vous allez voir." Huh? So you got all these people, and of course the United States and Israel, right, who are not helping, shitting on Lebanon, and while they're shitting on Lebanon, they're crapping all over Syria as well, and it's synergy of crap. So it's a very unfortunate situation, and I just want to give you some more statistics about Lebanon's economy over here. This is from AFP. So, I mean, you can just see, look at their GDP growth in percentage. How it's plummeted. Look at that. 8% GDP growth in 2010. Now in 2020, the forecast is, this was the forecast for 2020. It was minus 12. It's horrible. Look at how the currency has become worthless, even though it's pegged to the dollar. Horrible, right? So people are suffering. You have to understand this. It's really bad. It's really bad. Now, at the same time, look what's happening here, right? So May 31st, the U.S. sells off Iranian crude oil seized off the coast of UAE. Okay, so you guys may remember that Iran has been sending oil to people. Because here, Hezbollah, Nasrallah, he's talking about Hezbollah bringing in oil from Iran. Yeah, because that's the thing. Iran has been sending oil, fuel to Venezuela, right? Venezuela has the largest reserves of oil in the world, but they can't refine them because their infrastructure has been decimated by sanctions. Thanks to guess who? The United States. Every single administration, right? Now, Iran has sent them fuel. Iran has been sending Syria fuel as well. Take a look. This is just from a few hours ago, right? This is in the Jerusalem Post. Iranian oil tankers set to arrive in Syria on Friday. About another 300,000 barrels of oil are on a third tanker waiting in the Suez Canal. So Iran, even though Iran is under sanctions, crippling sanctions, even though Iran is not in a good spot, Iran has still been helping Syria, has still been helping Venezuela, and they would surely help Lebanon as well, if asked. Now, the problem is that, as you can see, the United States is a pirate. Literally. They've been seizing oil, Iranian oil, and selling it off, right? That's what pirates do. They board a ship, they steal the cargo, and then they sell it off for profit because they're pirates. And this is not the first time, right? And they've even done it when it's done privately. For example, you've had people who bought oil from the Iranian government and then as private persons and sailed it to Venezuela, right? So they're private persons. And the US has stolen their oil and sold it off. It's astonishing, right? And right now, by the way, you have Iran sending, I'll pull up the article for you. They're sending another ship to Venezuela with an armed escort. And the Biden administration has been warning them about this, right? So take a look at this. This is from The Guardian. Iran sends warship on rare Atlantic mission amid Venezuela speculation. Okay? So I'm trying to look for the Biden comment. Basically, they've been trying to warn people like, oh, you should not accept these ships. There are weapons on board. Again, the United States, my point here about the United States, that they think that they run the world, right? Here it is from Politico. U.S. warns Venezuela, Cuba to turn away Iranian ships believed to be carrying arms. Hold on a second. First of all, fuck you. Second of all, Cuba and Venezuela are not U.S. territories as much as you'd like them to be. Cuba and Venezuela are sovereign countries. So you can take your warning and stick it up your ass. Okay? Iran is also a sovereign country. Iran, Venezuela, Cuba, Syria, Lebanon do not need your fucking permission to trade with each other, you imperialist swine. Do you understand this? We do not need your permission. Eat shit. So this is the problem with the Westerners. They have some fucking superiority complex where they think that, no one is allowed to engage in trade. No one is allowed to partake in economic affairs, in finances, nothing without the permission of Britain and the United States. You can't do that. No, it's not allowed. Why? Because they have this colonial mindset. They still think that the Middle East, that West Asia, that all of these countries in the global South, North Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, all of these regions are still under their dominion. They're brought up to think like this, and the media continues to teach them this mentality, right? Who the fuck is the United States to tell Cuba and Venezuela what to do, or tell Iran what to do? Who are you? You are no one. The same thing for Britain. The same thing for France. You do not run these countries. They do not belong to you. So there is a real problem among the West, in the governments, in the media, even among the masses. They do not understand this concept of sovereignty, right? They still have this mentality that they run the world, that people in the global South belong to them, that they have to give them permission to do basic shit with each other. I reject this, okay? I do not tolerate this imperialist shit. Cubans, Venezuelans, Iranians, Syrians, Lebanese, everyone, they are all sovereign countries and sovereign peoples. Okay? I will not tolerate this nonsense. This is garbage. This is ridiculous. So anyway, my point, just going back to what's happening, is that Israel has been blowing up Iranian ships headed to Syria with oil. The United States has been pirating Iranian ships with oil headed to Venezuela. So, these people, they're criminals. And of course, Britain has been stealing over $1 billion worth of gold, Venezuelan gold, in the Bank of England in the city of London. That belonged to the Venezuelan people, right? So these people are pirates. They're criminal. It's organized crime on a state level. You must really understand this. It's so apparent once you think of it that way. It's dead. It's dead simple. That's the truth. It's organized crime on a state level, on an international level. That's what the United States, France, Britain are. They are criminals. They're imperialists. That's what they are. So, I really, my heart goes out to the Lebanese. My point here is that, unfortunately, Lebanon, there are a lot of actors in the West who are trying to meddle in whatever future government may be built in Lebanon. Right? And they've made that clear. I mean, you had Macron landing there, the French president landing there, like some colonial bastard, like as if it's one of his territories, like a colony that he's come to visit and make sure everything's okay. Like, is everything all right in here? Good, I'll pop off for a bit. C'est pas possible, hein? So it's very unfortunate that they're still playing with the global South like this, and that this economic hardships, they're not just natural. It's not because Lebanon has a problem with, a fundamental problem with itself. No, these are factors from the West. The sanctions on Syria, they influence Lebanon. They affect Lebanon, right? The blockade on Syria, it influences Lebanon. There's so many factors here at play. So it's very horrible. It's very heartbreaking that people cannot even afford basic necessities. There's no fuel. And by the way, same thing in Syria. I mean, you guys know this. We've covered it a million times. Just look at the Syrian pound's depreciation over the years. Look at that, going from 2012 to 2020. Look at that. This is astonishing, right? I remember when I would go to Syria, 65 lira, 65 Syrian pounds for €1. And now it's in the thousands. My cousins have to wait 2 days maybe to get fuel for their car, up to 2 days. You want to get rghif khibz, like a bag of bread, flat bread, you got to wait 2-3 hours in line. That's democracy, right? They're bringing democracy to the Middle East.